something remarkable just happened, and the people who were never supposed to get angry got furious. For years, New York's most powerful land developers operated in silence, hiding behind zoning jargon, lobbyist networks, and city hall backdoor deals. But this week, Zohran Mamdani broke that silence. Not with a polite press release or a scripted speech, but with a direct confrontation that exposed how deeply corruption has been baked into New York's housing system. These developers weren't just offended. They were triggered, because someone finally named what they've spent millions to conceal. That profit, not people, has been driving housing policy. This moment isn't just about one politician calling out a corrupt system. It's about the millions of New Yorkers trapped by skyrocketing rents, broken zoning laws, and a political class too scared, or too bought, to challenge the real estate machine. And for the first time, that machine is shaking. The room wasn't supposed to feel electric. It was a standard New York Housing Committee hearing, beige walls, bad microphones, and the dull hum of bureaucratic routine. But the moment Zohran Mamdani started speaking, you could feel the temperature shift. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was recognition, the developers in the room suddenly realizing, oh, he's not playing by our rules. Mamdani didn't ease into it. He didn't sand down the edges to make anyone comfortable. He went straight for the pressure point, the quiet corruption threaded through New York's housing system. And you could see the reaction instantly. A couple of developers stiffened in their chairs. One shuffled his papers. Another leaned back with that forced half-smile powerful men use when they suddenly feel powerless. Then he said the line that landed like a crack of thunder. New York's housing crisis isn't an accident. It's engineered. You could almost hear the air leave the room. Mamdani laid out what most New Yorkers already feel in their bones. Developers have been manipulating zoning rules, exploiting every tax loophole available, and inflating land value not by building housing, but by not building housing. He brought receipts, not hidden documents, not secret investigations, but publicly available facts that somehow no one with real power ever seems to mention out loud. He pointed to the infamous 421 tax abatement, a program originally advertised as a tool to encourage affordable housing. In reality, it has given developers billions in tax breaks while producing a fraction of the affordable units it promised. He referenced the luxury ghost towers along Billionaires Row, glass skyscrapers where up to 50% of units sit empty, owned by foreign investors and hedge fund managers who may never step foot inside. And he reminded the room how rezonings, from Brooklyn to Queens, have repeatedly followed donor money, not community needs. And here's what made the moment historic. He wasn't whispering this. He wasn't hedging it with political pleasantries. He spoke it plainly, the way a regular New Yorker would say it at their kitchen table. And the developers hated it. You could see the emotional impact on their faces, discomfort sliding into irritation, irritation sharpening into frustration. A few tried to cut him off with technicalities. Assemblyman, that's not an accurate characterization. Or we need to stay focused on procedural matters, the classic bureaucratic move, redirect the conversation into meaningless legal jargon. But Mamdani didn't let them. He stepped over the interruptions with calm but unmistakable force, the way someone does when they know their argument is stronger than the room they are standing in. This was not politics as usual. For decades, the real estate industry has enjoyed a comfortable relationship with both Democrats and Republicans. Campaign donations flowed. Zoning rules bent. Public land was sold off at bargain prices. And elected officials, even the well-meaning ones, learned to tiptoe around developer interests. That was the unspoken contract. Until now. Mamdani's confrontation broke that contract right in front of them. A young legislator looked some of the city's most powerful players dead in the eye and told them, essentially, your business model is destroying the city you claim to build. That's why they were triggered. Not because his accusations were new, but because someone with a microphone and a legislative seat was finally saying them out loud. In public. On the record. And as he finished, the developers weren't just angry. They were rattled. Because he didn't just attack their narrative. He attacked the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar pipeline that relies on silence, confusion, and political politeness. And that raises the real question, the one we'll confront in the next chapter. If you really want to understand New York's housing crisis, not the headlines, not the excuses, you have to study the machinery behind it. Because corruption today doesn't look like a politician stuffing cash into a freezer. It looks clean. It looks polished. It comes wrapped in legal language, lobbying reports, and think tank white papers. But at its core, it's the same old story, power protecting profit at the expense of ordinary people. Developers don't need to bribe anyone. They just need to buy the conversation. And in New York, they've done it masterfully. Start with lobbying. According to public filings, the Real Estate Board of New York, REBNY, spends millions every year shaping state and city policy. Not influencing. Shaping. Their lobbyists practically write portions of the bills themselves, slipping in clauses about density allowances and as-of-right luxury development that sound harmless until you realize they are loopholes, carefully engineered shortcuts that maximize profit while minimizing public responsibility. Then you look at campaign donations. Rebni has poured money into both Democratic and Republican campaigns for decades. If you trace debates on zoning changes, you'll often see the same pattern: large contributions preceding major policy shifts. Suddenly, a neighborhood rezoning that local residents beg to stop becomes necessary for economic growth. Suddenly, luxury developers receive exemptions that magically appear in legislation. That's not a coincidence, that's the playbook. And one of the most strategic tactics in that playbook is land banking. Most people assume developers buy land because they want to build. But in New York, the smartest developers buy land and then intentionally don't build. They sit on vacant lots and boarded up properties for years. Why? Because every year they delay, the land becomes more valuable, especially when rezonings are coming. They are not producing housing, they are producing scarcity. And scarcity means higher prices for everyone else. Then there's the tax incentive system, a masterpiece of public manipulation. Programs like the now expired 421 tax abatement were sold as tools to increase affordable housing. But look at the numbers. Billions of dollars in tax breaks were handed out, yet the city ended up with only a fraction of the promised affordable units. The majority of the benefit went not to families in need, but to developers constructing high-end towers with affordable units that still charged well above what low-income residents could ever afford. What kind of affordability is that? It's not affordability, it's branding. And this pattern isn't new. Go back to the Bloomberg era, when massive rezonings across Brooklyn and Queens displaced long-standing working-class communities. Property values soared, small landlords sold out, speculative developers rushed in, and families who had lived in those neighborhoods for generations were pushed out. Cuomo had his own real estate pipeline. Some of his closest donors were in the development world. De Blasio ran on affordable housing but ended his term with affordability targets that fell far short of what he promised, largely because his administration continued using developer-friendly frameworks. And the philosophical truth is this: corruption doesn't thrive because a few developers cheat. It thrives because the entire political system, from city council offices to state leadership, lets them. Not always through malice, sometimes through apathy, other times through fear, and very often through dependence on the same donors who benefit from the system staying exactly as it is. That's what makes Mamdani's confrontation so important. He didn't uncover one bad deal or one shady tax break. He exposed something far bigger: an ecosystem. A machine designed to keep prices high, communities unstable, and developers rich. A machine that functions because it is protected by the very institutions meant to keep it in check. When we talk about corruption in the housing system, it's easy for it to sound abstract, like something happening out there, far away from the lives of ordinary people. But in New York, the consequences aren't abstract at all. They are deeply human, brutally personal, and felt in ways that shape every part of a family's life. Because while developers have been perfecting the art of profit-making, working families have become the collateral damage. Start with the most immediate reality: rent. In the last decade, median rent in New York City has skyrocketed to historic highs. According to public housing data and market reports, apartments in many neighborhoods now cost more than the entire monthly income of the average working-class household. And for families already living one paycheck away from crisis, every rent hike isn't just a price adjustment, it's a threat. A warning. A reminder that stability can disappear with a single notice taped to the door. And displacement isn't just about moving. It's about erasure. When a landlord refuses to fix the heat for months, knowing tenants can't afford legal help, that's a predatory strategy. When a building mysteriously needs renovations right after a rezoning announcement, forcing out long-time residents, that's engineered eviction. When developers swoop into neighborhoods where families have lived for 30, 40, even 50 years and replace modest apartments with luxury glass towers, they aren't just changing a skyline. They are wiping out culture, memory, and identity. Look at the numbers. Homelessness in New York has reached the highest levels since the Great Depression. Tens of thousands of children sleep in shelters each night, kids who are expected to do homework, focus in class, and dream about their future while living in the most unstable conditions imaginable. Think about the psychological toll that takes. Children switching schools 3 or 4 times in a year, losing friends, losing routine, losing the sense that they belong anywhere. And what about elderly residents? Imagine spending your entire adult life in the same neighborhood, buying groceries from the same corner store, taking the same bus, knowing every neighbor by name, only to be priced out at 70 years old because the building was purchased by a development firm that sees you as low-value occupancy. These people aren't numbers. They are human beings who built the very communities developers now carve up for profit. Meanwhile, what do developers offer in return? Luxury. Tower after tower after tower. Empty investment condos. Rooftop pools. Dormant lobbies. Everything except what the city actually needs. And when you look at this side by side, overcrowded apartments with mold and broken elevators versus skyscrapers with marble interiors and unused penthouses, it becomes painfully clear. This system was never designed for regular people. Because here's the truth, New York doesn't have a housing shortage. It has a housing priorities problem. There are more than enough units for people, but not enough that people can afford. Housing has become a commodity, a financial asset class for corporations and wealthy investors. It's not built around shelter or community. It's built around yield. And that is why Mamdani's anger resonates so deeply. He isn't speaking for lobbyists, donors, or consultants. He's speaking for the millions of New Yorkers who never get a seat at the table, yet pay the heaviest price for decisions made behind closed doors. His outrage isn't performative. It's rooted in the lived reality of the people he represents. Parents juggling 2 jobs, seniors hanging on to rent-controlled apartments, immigrants fighting predatory landlords, young workers trapped in unstable leases. Because corruption isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It isn't just policy language. It's the sound of a child asking why they have to move again. It's the look on a father's face when rent goes up $400 in 1 year. It's a grandmother standing in front of a luxury tower that replaced the building she grew up in. And if this is what the victims endure in plain sight, the next question becomes even more urgent. If the public confrontation was the spark, then what happened behind closed doors was the fire. Because the real estate industry, for all its polished branding and glossy brochures, runs on one essential fuel: silence. They need the public quiet. They need the political class compliant. They need the language around housing to stay technical, boring, and inaccessible. The second someone breaks that silence in plain, human, moral terms, their entire revenue model begins to shake. And that is exactly what Mamdani did. The moment his remarks started circulating, clipped on social media, shared by tenants groups, replayed on local radio, the reaction inside the developer world was immediate. Not public. Private. You could almost hear the phones lighting up. Lobbyists sending late-night emails. PR teams drafting clarifications. Industry groups whispering to sympathetic politicians, this rhetoric is dangerous. That word, rhetoric, is always the tell. It means, stop telling the truth out loud. Within days, you could see the first predictable tactic: emergency PR statements. Carefully worded press releases insisting that developers welcome conversations about affordability, while dodging every specific accusation. Then came the next move: op-eds in friendly media outlets arguing that critics like Mamdani are oversimplifying complex issues. They never want to debate facts, only tone. Because if the debate stays emotional and the facts remain hidden, they win. And the most reliable players showed up right on schedule: political centrists. You've seen them before, the self-declared moderates who step forward whenever corporate interests feel threatened. They frame it as pragmatism. They talk about working collaboratively with stakeholders. But that language always translates into the same thing: maintain the status quo. These politicians aren't neutral, they are the shield. They tell the public that activists are unrealistic, that reformers are too harsh, that developers are essential partners. And developers love this, because it reframes corruption as compromise. If all of this feels familiar, it's because it is. We've watched this theater before. Think back to the big tobacco hearings of the 1990s, when industry executives denied, under oath, that cigarettes were addictive. The moment public truth threatened profit, the panic machine kicked into overdrive. Or consider the aftermath of the 2008 financial crash, when Wall Street firms scrambled to water down the Dodd-Frank regulations meant to rein in their own misconduct. Industries that rely on structural exploitation always have the same instinct: circle the wagons. New York's real estate class is no different. Because Mamdani didn't just accuse them of bad behavior, he exposed their dependence on darkness. He revealed the scaffolding beneath the skyline. And that is the one thing they cannot tolerate. Here's why they are truly triggered. For decades, developers have controlled the narrative. They've convinced the public that luxury towers are inevitable, that affordability is impossible, that market forces are some natural law rather than a design. They've made themselves appear indispensable, the benevolent builders of a city's future. And suddenly, someone stood up in broad daylight and said, "No, you're not building a city, you're extracting one." That single shift, from builder to extractor, is what terrifies them. Because once the narrative changes, the politics change. Once the politics change, the policies change. And once the policies change, the profits change. If the earlier chapters showed you the mechanics of corruption, the lobbying, the tax loopholes, the engineered scarcity, then this final chapter asks a far bigger question: what kind of city do we actually want New York to become? Because underneath all the policy talk, underneath the hearings and the press releases, there's a deeper ideological struggle being fought over the soul of this city. For decades, New York has been shaped not by its people, but by its investors. Entire neighborhoods designed around profit margins. Skyscrapers built for foreign capital rather than local families. Public land quietly transferred to private hands. And whenever critics raised concerns, the response was always the same: this is just how the market works. But markets don't design themselves. People design markets. Power structures design markets. And right now, the people designing New York's housing market aren't nurses, teachers, delivery workers, or first-generation immigrants. They're corporate developers and financial institutions who treat land the way Wall Street treats stock. And this isn't just a New York story. Look at London. Look at Vancouver. Look at Toronto, San Francisco, Sydney. Cities across the world have become playgrounds for global capital, where housing is less a right and more a speculative asset. Luxury towers sit half empty while working families squeeze into overcrowded units. Local wages stagnate while property values soar. The pattern is identical because the system driving it is identical: concentrated wealth shaping urban life to maximize return on investment. So we have to ask ourselves, do we want New York to follow that same path, or can we imagine something different? This is where political philosophy becomes more than theory. It becomes survival. Because when wealth concentrates at the top, when a handful of institutions control housing, land, and zoning, everything else starts to bend around those interests. Policing adjusts to protect high-value areas. Public transit expands or shrinks based on developer profit forecasts. Schools become underfunded as neighborhoods destabilize. Immigration policy shifts to favor workers who fit the new economic model. These issues may seem separate, but they are interlinked, pulled together by the gravitational force of concentrated real estate power. And this is why Mamdani's confrontation matters. Not because one speech will reform housing, but because it signals a shift, a refusal to accept developer-first politics as the natural order of things. His challenge echoed what millions of people feel but rarely hear represented in government: that a city should serve the people who keep it alive, not the people who treat it like a monopoly board. What we're seeing now is the early stage of a cultural and political rebellion: tenants demanding rights, workers demanding stability, communities demanding a say in what gets built, where it gets built, and who benefits from it. This isn't anti-development. It's anti-extraction. It's anti-corruption. It's anti-inequality disguised as inevitability. Because let's be clear, cities do not just happen. They are built by choices. Choices about zoning. Choices about investment. Choices about who gets to stay and who gets pushed out. And for too long, those choices have been made by a small class of elites whose primary goal is to convert human necessity into corporate revenue. So the real question, the historical question, is this: will New York continue to be engineered for investors, or will it finally be reclaimed by the families who live, work, and sacrifice to make this city function every single day? This fight is about more than buildings. It's about democratic power. It's about economic dignity. It's about whether the future of one of the world's greatest cities will be dictated by a handful of wealthy interests, or rewritten by the millions who have been pushed aside for far too long.